30 years ago, Ann Walsh Bradley was sworn in to serve as a justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Now, 3 10-year terms later, she is retiring and reflecting on her past, the changes, the future, and a recent promotion. Well, first of all, congratulations on your 30 years serving on the bench.
Thank you, Mark.
And you're kind of finishing out with a promotion.
That's right, absolutely, and I'm honored to have it.
It's an interesting thing because prior to 2015 and a constitutional amendment, you would have been Chief Justice years ago.
Yes, that's right. And in 2015, the constitutional amendment changed the selection of justice or Chief Justice from seniority to election by the colleagues.
And it was a Republican legislature that pushed that forward.
Yes.
And it was, I believe the Supreme Court at the time was leaning more conservative.
That would be a correct characterization, yes.
So was it a political move to change the Constitution?
It was, I think, a move, although other states select Chief Justice also by vote of colleagues, but Wisconsin has not for decades upon decades upon decades upon decades. And I think it was viewed, at least by some, as an desire to change the Chief Justice from the person of Shirley Abrahamson.
Shirley had been in the role for many years.
That's right. I think it was in 1996 that she became Chief Justice.
So 30 years now on the bench. Can you give me an idea, just what would you say would be one of the most important decisions that you were involved with in crafting while on the Supreme Court?
I get that question on occasion, Mark, and my answer remains the same. The most important decision, I think, is the one that I'm working on right now. In fact, when we finish talking, I will get back to my desk and continue working on the decision. So that's the most important one for me. And I leave to others, perhaps, to assess what they think is the most important. But I will say that opinions dealing with individual rights, rule of law, precedent, access to justice, transparency in government are all opinions that would mark part of my 30 years here on the court.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to assess over all the decisions that you made? Did you agree with a majority of them or dissent from them?
I wrote more, I agreed with the majority of them. Look, I think the kinds of cases that I had over the years, I had the clerk's office take a look at the number. And cases that I participated in, now some are just small cases deciding whether or not we're going to even take the case, to really robust opinions by this court. 28,000. Yes. Most of those I can tell you I agreed with, but most of those, the larger number of those, were smaller cases. I wrote my share of dissents over the period of time that I've been on this court.
Today, 6 of the 7 justices are women?
Yes.
And that's going to continue with Susan Crawford's election. I believe that's more than any other state in the union. What do you make of that?
Well, in Wisconsin, cream rises to the top. That's what I make of it, Mark. They run, and they have won, and sometimes against other women, sometimes against, in terms of primaries, and against men. They win based on their credentials, their messages to the voters, their experience. So we have 6 out of the 7 women here on the court. there may be a cry for diversity from some. I know that word on occasion is spoken a little more quietly these days, but we have 6 women out of 7. That's remarkable in the United States, as you indicate.
Mm-hmm. Your replacement, of course, coming on the bench would be Susan Crawford. She won in April. Following that election night, you were there, and you got to introduce her.
Yes.
How was that?
Thrilling. Nothing short of thrilling. I so much believe that she will be an excellent justice for this court, that she understands the importance of the role of the court and our judicial system. So I was thrilled that she was elected.
She indicated when she spoke, she had kind words for you.
Yes.
Kind of indicated it would be tough to fill your shoes.
Well, they're size 7, so I don't know. She was gracious in her comments to me that evening, Mark.
Yeah. Have you always been as involved in that election as in past elections?
No.
Why was it different this time?
It seemed to me, and this was a tough choice for me to make because I have not been as involved, but it was such an important election that I thought, and it was, of course, to take my seat, that my voice was important to be heard.
When you first became a lawyer, and I heard you talking with some students prior to this, did you see yourself as a trailblazer here in Wisconsin?
And I don't know if I saw myself as a trailblazer. I just showed up for work and did my best, right? And kept on trying and kept on trying. When I became a lawyer, of course, I moved to Wausau, where I still live, and there were not women lawyers there at the time. I remember my supervisor said to me, trying to be gracious to me that morning when I showed up for work, he said, "You know, I have no problem with a woman trying to do a man's job." So there were not a lot of women attorneys in that part of the state.
When you talk with students, and you do so on a fairly regular basis,
That's
not
correct.
only we were here when it was the class of the courts, is that
That's right.
correct? And you've also done the Civics program.
Yes.
When you talk with the students, do you get a lot of questions about being a female justice, and is it any tougher than you think it is for a man?
You know, I don't get questions now. I guess part of what you see, 6 women on the Supreme Court, so male and female students see the possibility of the vision of women being judges and justices, right? They seeing that makes it an open possibility for their future career. So I don't get questions like that anymore, no.
Was it more of a hindrance or more of a difficult path, you think, when you were going through it, opposed to what it is today?
Well, it was difficult. I don't know if it was more difficult than today. Today is pretty difficult also, right? Statewide races are not easily done. And I had my challenges, 4 kids at home, loving husband, that's not a challenge, that was a necessity under the circumstances. So each has its difficulties, I think, and its challenges.
When you do work with students and you go around the state educating them on the Constitution and how the law works, you actually started out as a teacher.
That's right.
Do you see this as somewhat of an extension of that initial role as a teacher?
Yes, absolutely. And when I first became a judge, I was a teacher of judges then. I was an associate dean of our Judicial College. And I see writing opinions as a device of teaching. And I certainly see speaking with students an extension of my love of teaching, yes.
Give me an idea how you got involved with Sandra Day O'Connor's iCivics program?
Well, iCivics has been in the past a defining part of my interest in courts. I'll tell you what really made the difference for me. Here's Sandra Day O'Connor. She was considered at the time the swing vote in the past on the U.S. Supreme Court, defined by some as the most important woman in U.S. history at that time because of that. And she said to me, as she was starting this iCivics program, she had just left the court, she said to me, you know, Ann, the most important professional thing that I have ever done is start this civics education program. She said that. And I remember thinking to myself, I didn't say to her, are you kidding? I mean, this is based on computer games, teaching civics to students, this most important woman in U.S. history. And so that sold me on the importance of civics education. And I became her co-chair of iCivics here in Wisconsin. And I've traveled not only around the state, all four corners of the state and in between, speaking about civics to kids. Before COVID, I was in Ukraine, actually, speaking with members of the Supreme Court and judicial education there about civics education and the programs we had here in Wisconsin.
You know, with all the cuts we're seeing to education, is it important to continue the civics education? Are we seeing enough support for that type of education?
Listen, when you're talking about civics education, you're talking about the heart of democracy, right? And how important, now more than ever, I think, it's important that people understand the role of government, the role of the three branches of government. That's been true all throughout our history. But certainly it's a poignant time now for civics education, not just for students, but for all of us, right?
It seems like a lot of people don't have a good background in civics education.
That's right. I think that that's something missing from a lot of schools. And so those of us kind of jump on board and champion that cause.
Now, while you were not the first woman on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, you were the first woman to be elected to the court.
That's correct.
Kind of a distinction. The ones before you were appointed and then won re-election to the court. Does that distinction hold a milestone for you?
It does for me personally, that's right. Getting to the court by way of election for me was important. I remember talking to many judges throughout the years, encouraging them, top-notch judges, encouraging them to run for the court, for a seat on the court. And so many of them would say to me, well, I would take an appointment, but I'm not going to run. That was common. And so it was, for me personally, kind of a badge of courage that I was willing to make that step. After all, I was a young judge from central Wisconsin. Wausau in the native language means faraway place, right? And so I ran against people from Greenbay and Madison and Milwaukee and prevailed.
We talked to Governor Evers about you. He put
nice.
out a proclamation when you announced you were going to retire, not seek another term.
Just love the work that she's done, but especially, you know, she takes her robe off and works on civics education. I think that's critical. She's left a great mark on the state of Wisconsin as judge, but a justice, but also making sure that civic education is important. And we're going to miss her.
He had nothing but positive things to say about you, about your support to support women in the law and the bench across Wisconsin while bringing honor and integrity to the role. How does it make you feel, the governor of the state recognizing you that way?
Well, I think he's a man of supremely good judgment. Of course I feel honored by that, right? It touches my heart to hear someone that I admire so much, Governor Evers, to say those kind words about me.
When he was superintendent of schools, you also worked with him through the Civics program? Or?
That's right. In fact, if I recall correctly, we wrote a joint editorial on civics education and its importance.
Now, when you, we mentioned when you first ran for this position, you weren't, that was in '95.
Mm-hmm.
Were you characterized as a Republican or a Democrat, keeping in mind it's a nonpartisan role? But it seems to me back then you had support from both Democrats and Republicans for your campaign. Is that not correct?
Oh, that's completely correct. I had as my co-chairs of the campaign then Republican First Lady Sue Ann Thompson. The other co-chair was Governor Earl, former Governor Earl, a Democrat, right? And throughout my campaign years, Governor Dreyfus, Governor McCallum, Governor Doyle, and First Ladies, Jessica Doyle, and I want to say God bless her, but perhaps let me say how, in other words, how much I appreciated that Sue Ann Thompson was my co-chair or the head of my committee for all of my elections.
Wow. So when did the political polarization of this particular seat change? It's very much one side or the other now.
Some point to around 2007, 2008, and that came together with money. And, so there was some change in that time. I remember in 2005, however, I met with the Democratic chair of the party, state party, didn't know that person beforehand. I met with the Republican chair, didn't know that person beforehand, and I said to both of them, kind of brazenly probably, I want you to stay out of this race, my race. Let me note, I was unopposed in 2005. In fact, the Republican chair said to me, generally people I meet with want me to be giving them help, and you come to me saying stay away, as I did with the Democratic chair also.
Mm-hmm. Does a political influence in these races, does that bother you today?
Yes. Yes.
How is it going to change?
Well, we clearly need, in my mind, some reform. I don't have the answer, but I can tell just by looking at the media after the election, the number of people who are commenting about the need for some change. And I agree with that.
Back in, I believe it was 2012, former Justice Patrick Crooks from Greenbay, he called for the state to consider ending direct elections of court members in favor of some sort of merit system, perhaps, due to the amount of money, he said, and in these races, as well as internal problems it creates for the court. Mm-hmm. And I believe at the time, you were quoted as saying that even back then, that you weren't exactly in favor of that, but considering it would be a good option.
That's right. The election of judges, we look around and think, well, that's our norm. Well, the only country that elects all of their judges, and that just started last year, 2024, is Mexico. The only country in the world that elects all of their judges, and it's very controversial. The other country that's akin to that is Bolivia, and it is seeing some difficulties. I'm going to be on a panel in a couple of weeks, international panel, dealing with judicial elections, and so I think it's appropriate that we look at our own system. And there are all sorts of alternatives, different kinds of elections, appointment, but several different kinds of appointment processes. And then, of course, some kind of regulatory things. I see some legislators that are interested in looking at the amount of contributions and disclosure, and a proposal that was floated previously dealing with one term of a longer term, 16 years. I mean, there are all sorts of ideas of reform, and I'm glad they'll be discussed, because our challenge is to make it better.
And is there any option or plan that you see out there right now that's been floated that's in your mind that maybe would be a better solution?
Well, this is going to be difficult because you have U.S. Supreme Court cases that kind of define some of the parameters. Citizens United, right? That's a case that said that corporations have First Amendment rights and that contributions are speech, right? Minnesota versus White, these are perhaps a bit too much in the weeds, but indicates that candidates have First Amendment rights and can talk about cases that may even be coming before the court if they wish, because they have that right. And so this is a difficult area to navigate, but one that has to be explored, and I think some solutions really are required.
This last election in April for your seat was a record in the amount of money spent.
Yes, Mark.
And it beat the old record that was set by Wisconsin just a couple of years earlier. $100 million spent on this one race. That just doesn't sound like it should be happening.
Well, it doesn't sound like it should be happening to you, and I think it doesn't sound like it should be happening to the people of this state. There's a great concern of what it does, right? Because what we want is a fair and impartial judiciary, and the presence of money causes concerns in that regard.
I know Susan Crawford's opponent, there was more money spent for his campaign than for her campaign. Do you think the money played a role ultimately?
Not much, no. No, I think people looked at the candidates, looked at their campaigns, and decided who would be the better to sit on the Wisconsin Supreme Court as a justice.
Is deciding putting campaign finance limits on a race like the state Supreme Court, is that something the legislature needs to address?
Well, they will take a look at it, but again, contribution limits will have to pass Citizens United.
When I mentioned Justice Crooks, he mentioned the internal problems the money causes in the court. You kind of mentioned the money creating an issue as well. As you know, the previous year in 2011, there were headlines where Justice David Prosser was investigated for putting his hands on your throat. Is that an indication of those internal problems caused by kind of a conflict because of money?
You know, when money and politics enter into the discussion and enter into the venue, sure, but by and large, you know, we deal with important cases. They're tough cases, and we have a lot of responsibility in this kind of environment to decide those cases. So the way that I look at it, looked at it in the past and look at it now, we may be divided in many ways in our ideology and trying to engage in important discussions and decisions. But I'll tell you one thing we're united in. We are united in our desire to serve the people of the state and follow the rule of law. We may see that differently, but we're united in that goal.
When you were elected, as we mentioned, I think you were viewed as an independent candidate, nonpartisan. Today, you see right off the bat, this one's leaning this way, this one's leaning this way. How do we get rid of that characterization?
I'll tell you what I would like. My vision for this court is consistent with what it was when I got on the court. We were considered one of the top state courts in the nation. People in other states, justices, would cite our opinions, which showed their respect for our opinions. We were considered a leader in the nation in administrative access to legal opportunities in this state, access to the courts. We've fallen behind on that, and so my goal for this court is that it returns to that status of being a leader in the development of law and the development of administrative initiatives that improve our system. And I think that's important not just for the court system itself, but for the 5.9 million people who call Wisconsin home. That's where we have to be headed.
Looking at the future, you won't be on the court next year, but what key cases do you see coming up? We've heard some rumblings in the race. What do you see on the docket ahead?
It's hard to know, but oftentimes the things that are on our docket are as a result of either legislation that was passed and the dynamics between the other branches of government, right? Some of those cases, which are high-profile cases, are the cases that have been landing on our desks, and I think will continue to do so.
We've seen the current legislature over the past few years add things to referendums. They want a constitutional change. Instead of making their own decision with the legislature and the governor. And a lot of times it ends up coming to you guys on the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Is the legislature not doing its job, instead trying to push it onto the Supreme Court to get it done?
I recall a quote from a political scientist at the university here in Madison. He was opining on the very question that you ask, and in his opinion, he thought that because the legislature and the governor, the other branches of government, were at odds with each other, that meant those cases will be coming to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
After 30 years, what do you think you're going to miss the most?
Both the people and the place. I love this building. This is a treasure for the people of the state. There is not one day, and I mean this, not one day when I enter this building that I am not at least a little awestruck. And I generally, if I don't have a lot of files, intentionally walk up the grand staircases because it is really an awesome opportunity to be in this building. And then, of course, the friends from my colleagues on this court, to everyone, to the staff, to the people who work in maintenance. I've become close to a lot of people in this building over the last 30 years.
And I know originally you had said you were going to run for another term.
Yes.
You changed your mind. So I guess a two-part question: why did you change your mind? And so what is your vision of the future for Ann Walsh Bradley?
Well, I think one of the reasons I changed my mind is the vision of what I want to be for my future. For many years, I've been the chair of this International Women's Judges Association. We have 6,000 members worldwide, 143 countries we represent. And I've been doing that as chair of the Board of Trustees for many years. I helped found that organization back in 1989 when the seed was planted. So I will continue to do my international work and perhaps be able to give it a little more time than I have while doing this, my day job, which is also my night and weekend job oftentimes.
Well, we thank you for your service and for talking with us here today.
Well, I loved the opportunity to sit down and chat with you. Thank you, Mark.
Great. Thank you.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Justice Ann Walsh Bradley is set to wrap up her 30-year career on the High Court this summer, with her replacement being sworn in August 1st. Reporting from Madison, Mark Leland, Fox 11 News.